Okay, so biotic factors are things in an ecosystem that are alive, that are living things. Abiotic factors in an ecosystem are non-living things that affect the other things in that ecosystem. So the other things in that ecosystem could be you, a tree, a frog, an earthworm, a tick, a spirochete, all of those things. Bio means life or living. A means without. Is a predator a biotic factor? If you are a rabbit, and you are a coyote, do you influence her? Yes. You might very well end her furry little life. Ooh. If you are a rabbit, we're going to keep you as a rabbit, and you are a nice juicy dandelion, might she influence you? Yes. She might end your nice green and yellow life. You know what predators and prey are. You've known that probably forever. Predators are things that eat other things. They influence the things they eat. Prey species influence their predators. Now, in terms of influence, the sort of big kahuna, and we will talk a lot more about this in the next chapter, but the really big deal are what are called symbiotic relationships. Sim means together. Bio means life. Symbiotic are together living things. They're relationships that are long-term. They're between more than one species. So coyotes and rabbits, rabbits and clover. Those are long-term, multi-generational symbiotic relationships. You have a symbiotic organism in your gut right now. You have a bunch of them, actually, I should hope. Bacteria. We have bacteria that live in our guts. They help us digest our food. Without them, we couldn't digest our food. Without us, they wouldn't have a place to live. It's ever so convenient for both of us. Everybody gets something out of the relationship. It's a mutualistic relationship. There are also relationships where one organism benefits and the other one isn't really harmed. It's okay. And then we have those relationships where one organism is making a living off harming the other. And they're doing well. We talked about one of these. Tick, 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 tick. Ticks. They're a parasite. They're not the only parasite. We'll talk about some other parasites. Ooh, I've got some great botfly videos. No thanks. These are all relationships that are multi-generational. They're between two different species. And they really influence the organisms in question tremendously. So these are the living things that affect stuff in an ecosystem. If a deer chews all the baby trees down to the ground, they've affected those baby trees. Not in a good way for the baby trees. But starting off, I said we were going to start to talk about the non-living things that affected all of the organisms in an ecosystem. And I want to start that conversation. So the abiotic factors are the non-living things that influence the whole rest of the system. What? No, you're not. You are totally biotic, Josh. All living things have a range of conditions they can tolerate. Is anybody in here too warm or too cold? Typically, I would bet that most of you are hovering right around a nice toasty 37 degrees Celsius. That's 98.5 degrees Fahrenheit, roughly. That's the average human body temperature. Some of us run a little colder, some of us run a little hotter, but on average, we all hover right around 37 Celsius. Now, what happens if your body temperature drops? Has anybody here ever been so cold that their hands wouldn't work? They couldn't grip something? Ugh, I hate that feeling. Or you're really cold and your mouth won't work. You're trying to talk to your friend. You can't really form words. It's because your muscle coordination is starting to decline. Your muscular coordination is sort of sliding downhill. Well, that happens for a while. And then if you hit 87 degrees core body temp, guess what happens? You die. 86, 87, something like that. Yeah, you just die. You become unconscious shortly before that, but at 80, whatever, 6, 5, 7, somewhere in there. I'm guessing that if you're at 87, you're not quibbling over the details, because unless some real serious action is taken real fast, you're dead. Because you have a range of conditions you can survive in. Now, is anybody in here cold enough to shiver today? I should have asked people if they wanted the blanket. When you're shivering, what's your body doing? Warm you up. It's trying to keep you at 37 Celsius. Because your body wants to maintain stable conditions. What do we call that? Homeostasis. Homeostasis, the fact that you need to have steady, stable conditions. So you have a range of conditions that you can survive in. We might as well go ahead and talk about temperature. That's a good first one. There are bacteria that live at the bottom of the ocean. The water is 750 degrees Fahrenheit. Water? Liquid? 750 Fahrenheit? How is that possible? That's above the boiling point of water, she said with her eyebrows quizzically. I saw several of you. Pressure. Pressure. It is under such pressure from the weight of the water above it that it stays a liquid. 750 degrees Fahrenheit. And these little teeny bacteria thrive. They do very well there. Now, if you took them out and put them in a pan of boiling water, 212 degrees, guess what would probably happen? They would die. It would be way too cold for them. I find fascinating the idea of a creature that would freeze to death in boiling water. Is that weird? Put a pan of boiling water on the stove, you put one of these bacteria from the bottom of the ocean in it, they would freeze to death. That's bizarre. Because their comfort zone, where they are happiest, where they are healthy, where they are evolved to live, is 750 degrees Fahrenheit. And crazy pressure. I mean, not to mention the fact they'd explode up here. There are plants that live in the Arctic that survive nearly negative 100 Fahrenheit. You put them outside on a nice 30-degree winter day here, and they'd probably cook. They would not survive well in these temperatures. This would be the outer range of what they could survive. Because everything has a range in which it works well. So for you, now of course we're not talking about the outside of your body, we're talking about what your body can maintain inside. Your core temp has to stay between 113 and, okay, I say 86 on here. I'm sure I looked it up when I made the slides. I hope. What happens if your core temp goes over 113, do you think? What happens?
Goes over 113?
Yeah, hey, we're still here. We might have other stuff to write down. What happens, so what happens to you at 86 or below 86?
Freeze.
You die. What happens above 113? You die. Outside that range where you are able to exist, you can't survive. Same is true for these bacteria or these plants. They're healthy and happy at a certain range, and beyond that, they're toast. They're done. So Whoops. Rain, water, that is not a biotic factor. It's an abiotic factor. There are organisms that live in the deserts where, well, I lived in Tucson, Arizona, the Sonoran Desert, and Tucson got, what was it, 16 centimeters of rain a year. That's less than 8 inches. Less than 8 inches of rain every year. I mean, very, very dry. The plants that live there have evolved under those conditions. They are adapted to low moisture conditions. And if you gave them the kind of water we get here, they would flood. They'd be flooded out. You know, even in a dry year. Now, you take a plant from the rainforest, where they get over 200 inches of rain a year, and you put them in conditions like we have here, and they will die. It's like a drought for them. There are organisms that are adapted for almost every condition you can think of on Earth. But they can't stand that big a range. So for all organisms, are you starting to remember this thing you drew, something with a line and conditions, and no? You can see differences in soil acidity. For those of you who are doing any kind of research with plants, soil acidity is really important. Anybody here like blueberries? I love blueberries. I had frozen blueberries for breakfast. We go pick them and freeze them every year. And blueberries love acid soil. If you want to plant a blueberry bush at home, you can mulch that with pine needles. You can make that soil really, really acid, and the blueberries will be just pleased as punch. Now, you put blueberries in a very alkaline soil, they'll die. They won't do well. First, they'll stop flowering, and then they'll stop growing, and then eventually, if you continue to abuse them in that way, they'll just die. Because they do well in acid soil. There are other things that do well in alkaline soil. There are very few organisms that can stand a big range. Okay. How well you tolerate something is how well you do under a certain condition. So, tolerance is how well an organism performs under a changing abiotic condition. And this is where we're going to start to look at tolerance curves and graphing them. We're going to start to talk about green zones and orange zones. Okay, so we're doing human core temp tolerance. So between maybe 35 and 38 Celsius. So that's a slightly reduced temperature, a little chilled, but not much. Some of us actually have a low normal temperature. I'm a normal 36 or so. So it's probably why I like it so cold in here. But in that range, a few degrees on either side of what's usually considered a normal human body temperature, we do well. We can grow, we can reproduce, we can function, we can feed ourselves. So in there, and we're going to call this the green zone, because this is the zone where basically things are good. And I'm going to pick a nice fat marker. I'm going to do that in green. And if you don't have colored pencils, you don't need to use them, but you know, I'm doing this because it works mentally as well as visually. Now, when you have a slightly reduced temperature, so here, let's talk about fever first, because we said some of you have had fevers recently, you've been sick. So that might be, you know, somewhere like 38 up to, and oh, my Celsius stuff is not good. Oh, I should know this better. Well, probably up to, I'm going to say like 40 Celsius, something like that. Probably up to the low hundreds, a fever in the low hundreds. Okay? So up to that low fever, a human being can still grow. If you have a little kid who gets a fever, they don't stop growing because they get a fever. So they can still grow, but something does get compromised. So interestingly enough, a single fever can knock out a male's sperm production, and it can knock out an ovulation event for a female. Yes. Now, I mean, this is not like, this is not health class, and I am not advocating getting a fever as a means of birth control. Let me just make that abundantly clear. But individuals don't reproduce well once that core temp rises a little bit. Even a low-grade fever can compromise reproduction. So here, they're still going to grow, but they're not going to reproduce. So the individual grows. Does the population grow if nobody's reproducing? No. Huh. Well, so, you know, down on this side, and this might be getting down to like 33, 34. I'm not really sure of my numbers here. I should be doing this in Fahrenheit because I am feeling non-fluent. But here also, once you get to a point where you're too cold, the body shuts down non-essential functions. We talked about this with caloric intake. If you're not getting enough calories, your body shuts down egg and sperm production, shuts down ovulation, shuts down sperm production. When it gets too cold, same thing. The body says, nope, non-essential function, not wasting energy on it. We're going to spend all our energy on getting warm. So again, you still might grow, but you can't reproduce. And this is the yellow zone. Pardon? So in that yellow zone, individuals still grow, but they don't reproduce. Reproductive activity stops. So it means that if everybody in a population is in that yellow zone, what happens to the size of the population? Eventually it starts to decrease as people start to die. Yeah, because you don't have new organisms coming into the population. Now, you might guess that if you get a whole lot hotter or a whole lot colder, it gets worse, and you'd be right. So, if we drop, we'll start on the cold side. If we drop that temperature a little bit more, and I don't know what the value number is for that, but if we drop that core temp a little bit more, we get to a point where there's no growth. So definitely no reproduction, but now you're actually losing growth potential. This isn't as big an issue for adults, but if you have children who are chronically in a condition where they're in this zone where there's no growth, you can actually affect their long-term growth. If you have children who are constantly in a condition where they're not getting their requirements met, you can affect their long-term growth. We see it with calories, for sure. It's probably a little harder to prove with core temp. We do such a very good job at keeping our core temp high, so we don't tend to stay in that orange zone with core temp for very long. And, you know, again, if you get a fever above a certain point, a fever can also stunt growth, at least temporarily. You can have a hiccup in growth if you have somebody with extended periods of fever. Well, what do you think happens if it gets even worse than that? Oh, yeah. So actually, I guess I do know the upper boundary for this. This value would be 113 Fahrenheit. And beyond that, guess what we have? Death. That's the zone where the organism doesn't survive, the individual doesn't survive. So if we drop core temp then below, again, I do know what the lower value for this is in Fahrenheit. We'll say 86 Fahrenheit. Once we get below that for core temp, that's death. The organism does not survive. So, it won't let me turn it sideways to right. So you see that there's just sort of this symmetry. When conditions are ideal, when everything is great, and you're in the middle of your tolerance zone for whatever factor it is, whether it's temperature or caloric intake or soil acidity if you're a plant, soil moisture. When life is great and you're in the green zone, you can grow, you can reproduce, the population can grow. Change your conditions a little bit. Things aren't so pretty. You as an individual may grow, but you're not going to be able to reproduce. Little bit worse. Suddenly individuals don't grow. They get sort of stuck. And then you move beyond that and you're in the zone of death. Once you get everybody in a population into that red zone, what happens? Well, yeah, if you get a whole species into that red zone, extinction. So think about this. If I have a population of bacteria that are happy and comfortable in the human gut, which is what temperature? What temperature is the human gut? About 98.6, 98.5 degrees. Around 100 degrees Fahrenheit by the time you get all the way down into the middle of it. Population of bacteria that are very happy at 100 degrees. What happens when I put them in the refrigerator? Well, they don't necessarily freeze. Some of them are pretty flexible. Why do we refrigerate food? Because a lot of those bacteria's green zone drops off once they get outside the human gut, and the individuals grow, but they reproduce best at the conditions found in your body. So they will not reproduce. Once you put them in the fridge, sometimes even individuals will slow down and not function, but they definitely won't reproduce. So if you've got 1 or 2 bacteria in your bowl of potato salad, that's fine. That's not going to hurt you. But if you leave them out at room temperature or on a nice warm day and they're at 100 degrees, they're going to have a big party. They're going to reproduce like crazy. And suddenly you're eating potato salad a la bacteria. Ew. Yeah. Never trust the stuff that's been out on the table at a picnic for a long time. So here's the deal. You are going to read that second Blizzard Bag article. It relates to another abiotic factor and how it affects living things in an ecosystem. Tomorrow, we'll see. I'll let you know when we walk in. We actually did more than the other class, which never happens. I don't know how that happened, but we did. I don't know if we're going to get to Friday stuff or if we're going to do a little bit of review on this. We're pretty far behind on content with the amount of days we've missed, and I want you guys to go to that end of course exam ready. So we'll see. We'll see. You'll know when you come in. I hate to do that to you, but we're going to wrap it up there. Questions?